Please join me in welcoming Josh Bersin.
Thank you, Kent. Well, for geeks like us, it's really a good time. And so what I'm going to do for about an hour is give you, I guess, analyst perspectives on what's going on in big data in HR and training, and give you a little bit of a teeny tiny workshop on some research we did since I was here last year. Every time I come here, I try to release something new that nobody's seen before, and I think hopefully a lot of you will see some things in the next hour that you haven't seen from us in the past. We are part of Deloitte now, for those of you who've been following us. We are still doing the same thing we've always done. We're still doing research, we're still doing benchmarking, we're still trying to figure out what's going on in this enormously complex space of talent and HR and learning and leadership. And so you can continue to count on us for that. And what will probably happen over time is the plan is that our research will get infused into Deloitte and to other services around the world that Deloitte provides. So we're going to be kind of the glue or the architecture of Deloitte as Deloitte builds out its services in this market. Deloitte is already a billion-dollar consulting company in the whole area of human capital, which was actually a surprise to me. So I won't spend a lot of time on that. But this area is very fascinating, and it's really changing. And the other thing I want to do before the evening's done, before I sit down, is I'm going to give you some examples of exactly what your organization will start to do over time. Because I have the opportunity through our research to meet with all sorts of different shapes and sizes of organizations, many of whom are quite sophisticated in their thinking, and many of whom are just getting started. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is the roadmap that you can sort of use for yourself and predict yourself to go into as you move from learning measurement, learning evaluation, to talent, HR, predictive analytics, and probably just analytics is what it'll really turn into over time. This is a little bit about us. We cover a lot of different areas. So although I started as a learning analyst around 1998, I have the opportunity to sort of look at all of these topics. And so when I look at learning measurement and what it means, I think I can help you connect some of the dots to what that will eventually turn into in the other areas. We have actually two practice areas in measurement. One is the learning measurement area, where I wrote a book on this back in 2006. We have lots of examples of how companies do learning measurement. We have a framework. And then we have a whole another body of research that came out about a year ago on HR measurement and talent analytics. And we like to call it talent analytics for now. Who knows what the term will be 2 or 3 years from now. And we have a group of organizations that help us. And if you'd like to join this group, even if you're not a research member, we'd love that. We have about 15 to 20 organizations that we meet with every 6 months. Contact me if you'd like to join that. We pretty much get together in a secret location. We talk about what each other are doing. We share information on vendors. We don't have any vendors in there. And it's been very, very interesting and very educational. We're going to have another meeting of that group at our conference in April, which is coming up next month. So I would welcome any of you that are not part of that to just get hold of me. All right. So what does it mean? What does this term big data mean? When I basically, by the way, the reason that I'm very interested in this topic is I spent 8 years as a data warehousing product manager at Sybase before I got into HR. So I actually had an early experience in this part of business quite some time ago. And when the word big data took off, I thought, that word is going to stick. That's kind of a sexy, interesting, provocative term that no one's going to understand. And it really did stick. I mean, we don't really know what it means. Is it Google? Is it Facebook? I talked to a telecommunications company this week that said they're going to take all their billing data, all their location data, all their transaction data, all their marketing data, and put it into a big database and figure out what's going on. I thought, whoa, that's going to be a big project. In our world, it seems like it's pretty small, but it's not, and I'll try to define that for you. And then I want to talk a little bit about some best practices and very specific examples. First context is, as all the speakers have said before this, the whole purpose of measuring things is to make your business better and to solve problems. And the problems that organizations have today are very acute in the area of talent. And we are seeing in every single survey that we do, and Deloitte's getting the same data, shortages of skills, shortages of leaders, imbalances in the availability of talent around the world. If you're a global company, I'm sure you're experiencing this right now. Inconsistent economic growth. One country is still in heavy recession, another country is booming, so you have to hire in one place. Maybe you can't hire, you don't want to hire in another place. All that is going on. Those are critical issues that prevent companies from growing. I like to think of it as, and this, I will only spend a minute on this, but I think you'll find this interesting. It's really a nexus of 6 things that have happened at the same time. Businesses have moved faster because of the ubiquitous nature of information and the internet. Emerging markets have exploded. I just read an article last weekend about Africa. We're going to start reading about Africa being the next emerging economy, the continent of Africa and some of the countries of Africa. So trying to shift resources towards growing economies. Changing the way the workplace works. We don't work in buildings where we sit in the same office all the time. We're interconnected, we're mobile, we're working from home, we're working part-time. So the nature of the workforce and the nature of the way people are managed has changed. That has resulted in a contingent workforce. So the way we measure, a lot of you are probably training people who are either partners, customers, alums, or even part-time employees. So those people weren't ever really considered in our HR infrastructure. Now we have to consider them as part of the workforce. Deloitte's very much that way. There's a lot of sort of attached people to Deloitte that are considered part of Deloitte. New models of leadership being created. Kevin did a wonderful job talking about leadership, and most of the companies we talk to tell us that their leadership is, not only do we not have enough leaders, but we're not even sure we have the right model for leaders. And I'll show you a good example of that where you can apply big data to leadership in an oil company. And then the competition for talent in the external market. And companies like LinkedIn, which are just exploding in growth, have essentially connected all of us together, competing with each other for all of our top people, right? So you need to think about measuring your employment brand, your engagement at a very strategic level. This isn't just nice to do so we reduce our turnover. This is going to be a war of competing for people. So you put that all together, and there's some really, really interesting business and economic and workforce drivers that are making it absolutely critical that we take this data and use it well and strategically. And of course, younger people are entering the workforce. We have changing demographics. When I talked to David Kuhl and I talked to his boss, the head of HR at First Data, he explained to me one of the challenges they were having was attracting young people to come into a relatively mature organization. And that can be a life or death business situation if you can't attract the right young people to join your organization. The world is getting younger, actually, not older anymore. So this is the big issue as well. So anyway, there's lots of drivers for HR and talent and learning being viewed as a strategic level, whether it be training people in the McDonald's establishments or getting your next generation of leaders in the door. Final thing that I think is a driver of HR and talent analytics is the changing nature of what people do. About 3 or 4 years ago in our learning and development research, we started to see a lot of companies telling us, we're doing training and we're doing succession and we're doing development planning, but we're just not getting people enough expertise over a short enough period of time to drive the level of skills we need to compete. And I think what you'll find in most industries is that your skills really are your product. I mean, they really are your differentiating factor. If you can invent or reinvent your products faster than your competition, your market share and your brand might be worth a little less than it used to. So this concept of specialized skills and building deeper and deeper levels of skills is now a critical competitive advantage. Accenture, who was one of our, and still is one of our research members, and we studied a lot over the years, told us that their differentiation in the market is a 7-level capability model for consultants. So they measure their consultants over 7 levels of expertise. And I think I'm seeing those are things you need to think about in your skills development in all the roles in your organization. We never stop learning. We never stop getting better at what we're doing. And that in turn is really a measurement opportunity far beyond how well somebody liked a course or whether they would recommend a course to someone else. Okay, so a little bit of context. I think the real issue in HR and big data is really what David Kuhl talked about yesterday. Can you answer these kinds of questions? Can you answer the questions that a business leader really, the decisions that are being made all the time with imperfect information? Every company in the world is making decisions like who should we hire, who should we promote, which is the right person to move into what position next, how should we better manage, enable, change the work environment to better support our customers with very little data. They're making those decisions based on gut feel, on experience, on commonly held beliefs, or maybe what's considered to be wisdom in the organization. And I'll show you an example of that in a minute. If we can help leaders make these decisions better, we're going to get a lot of credibility. I would say that in my definition of big data, and there's a lot of definitions of it out there because it's become a big high-tech and IT term, it isn't just a large amount of data that's changing rapidly. It's really taking the data that you have and taking advantage of it and using it in a strategic way. And the funny thing about HR is you already have most of the data you need. It may not be in one place. You don't have to go get it from Facebook or LinkedIn or the phone company or anybody else. It's in your company. And that's what we're finding in this research is that creative approaches to problem solving, which don't require necessarily multi-million-dollar data warehouses, can drive incredibly powerful solutions based on the data you have right in front of you. And I would say even the learning data that you have. If you look at the data that McDonald's is starting to collect on their organization, I really enjoyed that presentation today about the new role of the store manager, the general manager at McDonald's, the new capabilities, the new skill sets, the new competencies that those people have. That data is valuable not only to measure the return on training, that data is valuable to measure who should be promoted, what talent mobility makes most sense in McDonald's, where are they going to likely have the biggest failures or weaknesses in the organization, and on and on. And that, to me, is really what this is all about. So what I'm going to do now, really, for the next couple of minutes, is give you some context on how to do this in a relatively predictable fashion. By the way, this is exactly the same history that took place in other functions in business. The whole area of finance and operations was automated and measured in the 1960s and 1970s during the emergence of the industrial economy. Marketing became turned into a science. I remember when I was back at Sybase, when the first book was written about pinpoint marketing, they were saying, well, your marketing is now a science, and you need to learn how to do predictive marketing and pinpoint markets of one. And that was, part of really the beginning of the internet and all the technology that allowed us to really do sophisticated marketing. We are now in a talent economy, so the same thing's naturally going to happen here. It's almost a predictable evolution. And so, although maybe HR wasn't the most analytic function to begin with, as you'll see, in my opinion, you probably have a lot more analytic skills than you think you do. We have, in our organization, we have quite a few people that have IO psychology. How many of you have IO psychology backgrounds? How many of you took statistics? Okay, where I rest my case. We have a lot more skills in data analysis in HR than we realize. I just don't think we've totally put it all to use yet and found all the repeatable patterns that make it easy. So I don't buy this thing that we're going to be short, 1 million data scientists. I don't actually think that's true. I think we have many of those skills now. We just have to reposition them and use them in a new way as this part of the market really expands. Now, let's just talk about the concept of science and what it means. Science means observing something experimenting with it, and then acting upon that data. I was an engineer in college. A lot of you probably had to take science in high school and college, and you went through this, and you know what it is. You have a hypothesis, you think about the problem, you look at the data, the evidence, you draw a conclusion. You don't look at the evidence first and then try to figure out what the problem was. By the way, that's the way a lot of data projects start, is people start with the data first and then they try to work their way back. That's not the way science necessarily works. What is not science is saying, we always do it this way. Oh, it's the common approach of how we hire people in our company. These are the people, these are the characteristics of our leaders, and they've always been that way, and that's the way it's always worked for us. That's not really a scientific approach. And I think what we're going to find is that the companies that are actually willing to throw away some of their commonly held beliefs and let the data speak to the problem are going to find some very interesting changes. And I'll give you some examples of these things, that what seems intuitive actually may not really be true. Just like the Moneyball story, where baseball teams always used to hire the most athletic, the fastest running, the guys that hit the most home runs, and then they found out those aren't the guys that win baseball games. The guys that win baseball games are the guys that get on base. And maybe they're the ones that get all the walks. And so that book is all about taking the commonly held beliefs and trying to throw them aside when the data tells you different. And that I think is what's really going to happen. In this particular example, this is kind of astounding to me. IO psychology and personality assessments have been around for at least as long as I've been doing this, probably much, much longer than that. Those are all based on science. Those are scientifically validated tools based on hundreds of thousands to millions of people. But a lot of companies don't use them. I don't understand why. I mean, I think there's all sorts of varying reasons. People are afraid of them. People don't trust them. Maybe they've used the wrong ones. But just in this one area alone, and I'll show you two examples in a minute, you can use simple off-the-shelf science in your assessment, and with a carefully selected tool, not all tools are good for the same problem, you will dramatically improve the results. And again, surprise yourself. And I'm going to show you an example of a movie theater company and a retailer that will kind of, bring this home. Let me give you an example of where this has happened in one of the companies that I've been talking to the last year. So there's a large insurance company that is a very, very well-known, very successful, very fast-growing company. It's run by, I've never met the CEO, I've only met the HR people, but apparently it's run by some very smart guys. They have a lot of commonly held beliefs about the type of people they want to hire, what schools they should go to, what grades they should get, what their pedigree should be. They really believe in that, and their beliefs really revolve around, in our organization, we hire people from these schools that are in the top 10% of their graduating class because that's what we do. I'm not sure why they came to that conclusion, but that's what they do. And they've done that for years. And this particular individual who we were working with, who happens to be sort of a little bit of a contrary thinker, was the head of talent. And he said, I'm just curious if the data would prove that that's the right thing to do. So he had an analytics group. He had one person who was a statistician. She was not a data warehousing, data science guru. She was a statistician. And she took some time, she looked at the data. She did a correlation analysis, a causation analysis, to try to figure out, based on 20 or 30 different things, what was causing retention and high performance. Because in sales, two things happen if you fail. And Alan knows all about this. One is you don't sell very much, but you stick around. So you're kind of a low performer in place. Nobody likes that. Or you just realize you can't cut it and you take off. And so you've got a turnover problem, and now you have a territory with nobody selling. You have to rapidly replace that person. Both of those are very, very expensive situations. Extraordinarily expensive for a large organization. So anyway, they did this data analysis, and they found out that the things that correlated directly with sales performance and retention were, number one, resumes that had no grammatical mistakes. Does that sound familiar, Alan? We actually check people's spelling in the emails they send us now when they come to work for us, because it's an indicator of things. They finished some degree. In other words, they didn't drop out. Didn't really matter what degree it was, but they stuck it out. They had sold something in a related industry, so they understood the industry of insurance. They didn't have to have sold insurance, but they had to sell something that was sort of big and complicated and expensive. They had been successful in a prior job, whatever that job was. It really didn't seem to matter too much what the job was. They looked at various different sourcing pools. They had worked in an environment where they had sort of a vague set of instructions, so they worked in an unstructured job. They weren't doing telesales where they were selling something very simple, and it was a highly structured job. And they were familiar with the problem of having too much to do and having to manage your own time, which is basically a lot of the challenge of sales, is keeping your activity level up when you have lots and lots of leads and lots of clients and lots of prospects and lots of deals. What did not matter was the level of school, the grades, or the quality of their references. And those are the things that most companies put at the top of their list when they go out and hire salespeople. So this is basically a very simple situation of having to use data to challenge your belief system. Now, in a lot of these examples I'm going to show you, when you get the data and you look at it, you say, oh, that's obvious. I kind of knew that. But you kind of knew it, but you didn't act on it because there was some other thing going on in the organization, whether it be a belief system or maybe just a legacy process, and you weren't able to really take advantage of your intuition. So a lot of these applications that we're finding are really pointing out things that are sort of implicit in the knowledge of the organization, but not explicit, and bringing them out and then using them. So in this particular case, the company actually changed their sourcing model and dramatically improved their hiring. How many of you know this story? All right, everybody's heard this story. This is a year old. So this is the story about how analytics becomes predictive. I'll just briefly mention it. So Target, who does by the way, retailers if you work in a retailer, you probably have an analytics group that's very, very sophisticated. It's just they're over on the other side of the organization. So Target was analyzing transaction behavior of all of us who shop there, and they started sending mailers to an individual, I think a teenage girl, to her house, recommending that she buy baby supplies because her purchasing patterns indicated that she would be the type of person who would buy baby supplies. And what Target learned was that one of the most critical times when you can get a new customer is when they have a child, because they will change shopping stores. They'll go to a new place to shop, and you might be able to get them for life if you do that. So they really are focused on this particular event. So anyway, the father of this woman saw these mailers coming and went to the local store and said, please stop this. I have a teenage daughter. I really don't appreciate you sending this stuff to my house. I don't think it's appropriate. So the guy in the store, this is the story, I believe it was in Fortune or Forbes. The guy in the store went back, called the data analysis group, looked at the information they had, and said, well, I'm really sorry to tell you, but our data was wrong. We really thought that based on purchasing patterns, maybe your daughter was pregnant, but we'll take you off the list. So he goes home and he finds out his daughter is pregnant. So that's the story, and the only message is that this is very, very powerful, and it's being done today. This is a chart of where the free throws in basketball are most likely to be scored based on history. It's on the NBA website. It's available to any basketball team. So why don't we run our organizations like this? We can predict that if you're in the left hand of the court shooting, you're going to have dramatically higher results. Now, maybe that's because most of the players are right-handed. There's probably all sorts of reasons why that is. But this kind of stuff is out there all over the place, and we just have to learn how to apply it in HR. Okay, so where do we do it in HR? First of all, you have a lot of the data you need. You really don't have to go out and get it on the outside. You probably have a lot of the skills you need, and you're going to find that you have to do it. I would say, based on the level of momentum that I'm seeing, the companies that don't invest in this are going to be sorry, because the companies that do are going to be better at attracting and retaining people from them, from the others, if they don't. And I'll talk to you a little bit about what that means. Oftentimes, when I talk to organizations, I find that they haven't thought about this from a business standpoint, and they aren't always measuring the most important things that they need. I won't spend a lot of time on this chart. I think this problem will go away over time. As companies become more sophisticated in their thinking about why they're measuring things, they will start to measure different things. And I'll show you the example of the oil company and the leadership pipeline in a couple of minutes, where they were kind of measuring a lot of stuff. The data was in the HR systems, but they weren't really using it. And once they tapped into it, they realized there were some things going on in their organization they really were not aware of. I had an interesting conversation with somebody in Deloitte. I've only been with Deloitte for about 2 months. I would say I barely understand what's going on in the organization. Somebody called me up and said, we would like to better understand the capabilities, the skills development that takes place in our consulting organization as a result of project work. So we want to do project-based skills assessment so we can use project experience as a developmental experience in a very predictable way, which is a great thing to do if you're in any kind of a service organization. Very hard to do. I told this person about some examples I had seen in some organizations, and I said, by the way, is there an after-action review process at the end of the project where you write down the learnings of that particular project that can be shared with other people? And this was a person in learning development, and his reaction was, that's a really good idea. Maybe we should do that. So, we're sitting right in the middle of, Deloitte's a wonderful world-class organization. There's all sorts of opportunities to measure new things that we just haven't thought about quite yet, and they're all going to become more interesting to talk about. The one message I would give you about my experience in this industry, both on this technology side and now in the last few years as an analyst, is start with the problem first. Don't start with the data first. There's a lot of analysts and pundits now out there in the data warehousing industry. By the way, there's a parallel universe of you guys, of techies, going to conferences on analytics. There's hundreds of them, actually, who are doing this in IT right now. So inside your company, there's probably a whole bunch of geeks, gearhead type people looking for problems to solve. So when you get your hands on them, they're going to just swoop in and help you. Because the tech industry is just on fire here. But the number one thing is, this is science. So if you don't have a hypothesis, if you don't think about what the problem is you're trying to solve, you might waste a lot of time waiting around in information and not show what you get. Pick something that's sort of obvious and critical for your company. It might be sales productivity. It might be safety record. It might be turnover. It might, if you just look at something that's on the mind of your CEO or your top execs or your line of business counterparts, you'll probably find you can do a project that's very, very effective very quickly. Here's a funny one. This one, I don't know if you guys thought about this the way I did. This is basically a big data thing. So Yahoo last week says, Marissa Mayer says, the organization's not really very well organized. We have too many people working at home. I don't like this. What are they doing at home anyway? Well, she goes into the VPN login database and finds out that they're not logging into the VPN when they go home. And so she concludes they're not spending enough time working at home, and she issues an edict that we want people in the office. Now, I'm not sure if that was good or bad, but she's a data person. She came from Google. She probably had, she's very well known for, she's the one that decided that in Google, the little notifications are yellow. That was tested very, very carefully. When you go to Google and notifications come up in yellow, they tested hundreds of colors, before they decided which color is the most appropriate. So this is an example right here, very simple. It probably took her 1 day to figure this data out, and it was enough for her to make a business decision that probably will have a positive impact on Yahoo, even though it got a lot of bad press on Twitter. A lot of the alternative work environment people were up in arms. But this is, to me, a very, very legitimate opportunity to use the information sitting in front of you to make a very important decision. These are process problems, not project problems. You've all seen these kinds of charts before. As I show you the maturity model in a couple minutes, you'll see that every single organization we talk to, it takes 5 to 7 years to get good at this. So you can't do it all at once. If you just started with metrics that matter, you're in the beginning of this. If you've had metrics that matter for 2 or 3 years, you're in the early to mid stages. It is not something you can do all at once. You have to put together a multi-year roadmap. I'll show you an example of 2 of those, and you will find yourself in a really, really incredibly interesting place as you march down that roadmap. And one of the things we can help you with is actually building that roadmap and helping you, map out the direction and the capabilities that you need to go. And that's an area where we can really provide a lot of value. I've noticed, as I've talked to many companies, there's some things that'll get you in trouble. Number 1 is reliability. And I heard this from a lot of companies in the group. If you do some analysis and you stand up and you present it to your execs, the odds are your execs are already very data-oriented. They will question it. They will want to see if it's true. They will try to correlate it to something else they already know. And if you're incorrect, you're dead. Forget it. You won't be invited back. And I've seen this. So make sure that the data that you have is reliable. For example, one of the retailers I talked to said, we never take any critical workforce data and show it to our execs until we've had it for 2 years because it's always seasonal. So if we don't cut it off at the right period of time, we'll see variations simply based on the seasons and the seasonality of our workforce. I thought that was an interesting observation. 2 years is a long time to wait to get some critical information in front of the executive team, but he said, what I learned was it isn't worth it ruining our reputation because then I don't get the money to build this analytics team and I can't go back for more data, more information for the next time. Second is make the data actionable. Most of the organizations we talked, remember that chart I showed you with all the little lines, the statistics chart? So that company told me they presented that chart to their execs, and they got sort of thrown out of the room. They said, come back and show us what you're talking about. You actually have to become good at visualization. And this has been a real challenge for us in our organization. I happen to be sort of a visual thinker. A lot of our analysts are not. And I'll get data back from our own analysts. These are people with very good statistics backgrounds. And they'll show me a bunch of charts, and I'll look at this stuff. And, what is this? What are you trying to say? And they're, like, oh, well, this is correlated to this is. So what? Why do I care? What can I do with that information? And you have to take the information, you have to analyze it, and you need to sort of go home, have a shower, take a couple days off, come back and look at it again and say, what's the relevance of this and how are people going to use it? And that's actually sometimes the hardest part, is taking the findings and don't present the findings, present the recommendations as a result of the findings. And that's a different part of your brain and sometimes a different exercise than capturing the data. And I think that's what all the companies we talked to said, that turned out to be a challenge for us. And we had to get somebody that was good at visualization. We had to really learn how to present the findings in a way that people would actually understand them. The process has to be scalable. I'll show you a little bit more about the technology there. And then understandable. One of the things I'm going to talk about in a couple minutes is a data dictionary. How many of you have ever heard of the term data dictionary? Okay, a lot of you probably have. You really need to have one or create one, and you probably don't have one. Even though there may be one in your ERP system, you probably need to create one of your own. So you'll do a project and you'll study retention, and you'll look at the, say the sales organization, and you'll get some retention data out of the PeopleSoft system, and then you'll produce the data and you'll show it to somebody, and then somebody will ask you, was that from the beginning of the month to the end of the month, from the beginning of the month to the end of the following month? What about the end of the year when a lot of people was vacation included in that? If you didn't write all that stuff down, you're blown out of the water. That's what a data dictionary does. Is it allows you to store the information about the data, which is called metadata, in a place that everybody can find it. So as your organization becomes better and better and better at using this information, you keep your definitions consistent. So anyway, those are the 4 things we've found. There is a lot of opportunity to measure things. This is just some of the measures that we have found. We have a whole book of this stuff that you can get if you're a research member. You guys have all of every company has different things they measure because of the nature of their business, the types of regulation that they have. And I actually did, one of the things I had to do last year, this was driving me crazy. After all these organizations were telling us all this stuff, I created a framework. We created a framework for this. I won't take you through it. It's kind of one of our, kind of big, they call them wedding cake frameworks, all these layers. But it's there for you to look at. Actually, we didn't print it out, but you'll find that some of the data is in the HR system. Some of it is data that's computed in your organization because of the way you do business. And one of your jobs is to just write this stuff down and keep track of it. Oh, here's a picture. Okay, I won't take you through all this. But this is really a visual picture of what the categories of information are out there that you're going to find. Some of it is the core demographics of your workforce. Sometimes it has to do with age or certain demographic factors that are critical for a particular problem. And then there's all the derived measures from your HR practices, data that comes from your recruiting and your sourcing process, data that comes from your engagement surveys, and then data that comes from all the other things that you do in the organization. And this is a tool for you to just conceptualize when you have a problem, where might the data be and what might we want to get our hands on. Okay. We generally find that the problems, well, how many of you are from L&D or primarily L&D? Okay, any of you either are part of or run recruiting? Okay, this is what happens in most organizations. So I think one of the biggest transitions that's taking place is the combination of the different analytics groups in HR into one. Most companies have quite a bit of measurement in recruiting, quite a bit of measurement of engagement, quite a bit of measurement of comp and benefits, a lot of core HR compliance data, a fair amount of performance, succession, leadership data, and then all the learning data. And it turns out it's all interesting data, and it's all useful for optimizing that particular part of HR. But you really need to bring it together, because most of the real business problems are not purely learning problems. We might convince ourselves, and this is one of the problems we have in learning, we might convince ourselves that as a result of this fantastic new product training program we did, that the revenue per sales rep went up by 53%. And I saw this chart last week at a meeting I was in, and that's probably true. That correlation is probably true. But that may not be the biggest cause of why their sales productivity went up. It may be a contributing cause, but if you're only looking at one piece of data, somebody's going to come out of the woodwork and say, well, wait a minute, we just hired a whole bunch of people from our competitor at the same time you did that class. Are you sure that isn't the reason that the sales went up? And all of a sudden you're going to be sort of, better look at that. So generally one of the things that you'll see is I think your organization's direction is bringing these things together. And that's an organization problem, not really a data problem. Also, it is hard to get this stuff. The average company has something like 6 or 7 HR systems. We just got this data last week. It just boggles my mind. There's a massive industry of replacement of HR technology going on. Oracle, SAP, Workday, all the talent management vendors, they're all consolidating. Companies are replacing all their systems. It's never going to all be in one place. Unfortunately, we have this problem going on in the technology industry where you try to standardize on one piece of technology, they get bought by another company, they take that piece of technology, they do something else with it. So one way or another, if you don't have a data dictionary, it's not going to all come together. So I kind of warn you, these software vendors are going to come at you with beautiful tools. They're going to show you incredibly interesting dashboards, and they're going to say, if you just buy my software, you'll have this. It just isn't true. You probably won't have all your data in one place, and frankly, the hard work is really deciding what data you need, and then, as I said, using a scientific process to answer the problems. What most of the companies told us they did is they didn't try to consolidate it into a data warehouse, not up front. They just tried to figure out where it was first. They did a lot of exploration. So where is the data about turnover, and what does it mean? And so you'll see in the level 2 of the maturity model, there's a period of time that your organization's going to have to go through to just dig around and figure out what you have, find where the inconsistent definitions are, try to come up with standard definitions, and then when the time comes to do one of these projects and build a more scalable solution, you'll have a good idea of where it is. That's where you can get a tremendous amount of help from IT. There's a lot of IT people that do this for a living. There's a lot of IT experts that have been trained in doing that. They know where the data is. They don't always know how it's used, but working with them, you can do that. And that'll be, as I said, one of the steps that you'll go through as you evolve your analytics function. I obviously would love to see everything be standards. I'm part of the TDR initiative, but frankly, there really aren't a lot of standards. It took SHRM 2 years to come up with a standard for cost of hire. And it was a lot of hard work by a lot of people and a lot of yelling and screaming behind the scenes of different people with different stakeholder interests. You can, if you watch the SHRM website, every year or two you might find one more data element that's standardized by ANSI. They're moving very, very slowly. So I wouldn't try to wait for standards. Where they exist, great, use them. Unfortunately, you're going to have to just become familiar. You can come to people like us. You're just going to have to be familiar with what the standards are. And most of the companies that are sort of at level 3, level 4 have somebody that kind of monitors this stuff and they kind of know what's going on so they can tap into the standard when it becomes available. But there's just so many different sources and types of data in the talent world that we're not going to come up with a standard model of what everything means. So that's why you really have to do it for yourself. And tools are not the only solution. Now, and this is not, I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm not trying to push consulting. I'm just telling you what the reality is. Gartner believes that the bulk of the revenue that will be generated in this industry will be services revenue, because the problem is a problem of collection, analysis, categorization. It's a problem-solving area. It isn't a technology area. Now, I'm in California. I live in the Bay Area, so I've got all these startups all over the place, and I try to follow this space. There are some incredibly smart guys building companies now where you can, load your data in online to their cloud-based system, and it'll put together some sort of a dashboard and analyze it for you. I think most of you are in fairly big companies, and you probably won't find anybody like that. The company that will do that will probably be an 80% consulting company, 20% tools company. So you're about to get, those of you, we've just been, let's see, in the early 2000s we were dazzled with all the e-learning tools. Now we've been dazzled with all the talent management tools. Now we're going to get dazzled with all the analytics tools. Just be careful. I don't think that's going to solve the problem. It is a piece of the problem, and certainly tools like metrics that matter are critical, but you're going to have to really put a lot of your own energy into it. Okay. Now, how do you get there? Just really briefly, I've only got 10 or 15 minutes left. So one of the things that we do on your behalf is, we're doing all this research, and we're doing surveys, and we're doing interviews, and we're having working groups. And really, we're not doing this just for kicks. We're trying to make some sense of it. And in this particular case, after, probably 5-6 years of looking at this space from a whole bunch of different angles, we kind of came to a model. And here's what it is, and let me just explain it to you. And this is available, a lot of this is available in the public domain, and then you can get a lot of detail on this in our research program. The first is operational reporting. If you can't do operational reporting well, you will constantly be deluged with people running asking you for data. And operational reporting is, how many student hours did we deliver? How much is it costing us to deliver these courses? What's our level 1? What's our level 2 findings? Those are really not going to be strategic reports. They'll be useful to somebody. I wouldn't call them analytics by any means, but if you don't have a process for producing them, you will constantly be bogged down with that stuff, and you won't be able to do the more interesting things. So there's a period of time where you have to get your reporting act together. Okay, and certainly if you're spending hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars on training, you should do that anyway, because the CFO probably just wants to know where the money's going and what you're getting for it. Okay, so that's number one. The second is what I call proactive or advanced reporting. I don't need predictive analytics yet, but I just want to know student hours by geography, student hours by role, student hours by tenure, completion rates by role, completion rates by tenure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are just operational reports that are sliced and diced in more useful fashion. Okay, so they might be dashboards, they might be query tools, there's all sorts of different ways to produce this data. That is the next thing that you're going to be asked for, and those are tools that you probably want to put in the hands of business people. You want to probably give them. So I was at NetApp last week, and NetApp is a very advanced analytics company, and they are, you know, certainly at level 3, level 4 in their measurement journey. When they came, when Sundar, who runs is the CLO there, when he came to NetApp, the first 2 years, he basically spent only doing this stuff at the bottom. Took 2.5, 3 years to do this. He now has dashboards that all the sales managers have to look at their compliance and completion rates and scores of their employees. And if you're a sales manager and you have employees that haven't completed their mandatory product training or they scored low, it pops up on your dashboard and you talk to them and you take responsibility for it. That was a breakthrough for him. A lot of companies don't have that. So before you get all, you know, involved in, you know, statistics, you have to go through level 1 and level 2. Level 3 is where you have enough time, a little bit of breathing room. You've at least done enough of level 1 and level 2 to get people off your back that now you can take your statistics background and you can start looking at the correlation or causation or relationship between different things. So going back to sort of sales training, we now know the completion rates, we know the variation of completion rates. What is the relationship between our sales training and sales? How are we going to figure that out? Are we going to do an ROI project? Are we going to look at data and do some correlation? Are we going to do a causality project? There's all sorts of statistical tools for doing that. That's, to me, a level 3 type of analysis. That's where you're going to start really you know, producing some very, very high value for your organization. At this point, you need somebody in your organization that has some statistical skills. I actually didn't take a lot of statistics in school. I've learned a lot about it since then. I used to sit around and do this on pivot tables, and then our you know, our statisticians would just blow me out of the water, and they'd say, "Look, you know, that looks like the right answer, but it's wrong, and I'll just show you why." So at this level, you really do need to get your hands on a statistician, and there's plenty of people with statistics. I'll show you the data on this in a minute. That you can hire on contract basis too if you don't have them inside your organization. The fourth level is predictive analytics, and I'll show you an example of this too. Predictive analytics is where you create a model. You've done enough of the level 3 stuff, and you've pulled together enough pieces of information that now you can take, and this, by the way, this is something Deloitte does really well. I'm just blown away by some of the stuff that Deloitte does in financial and other areas. You create that model, and you test it backwards. You go, okay, let's look at what actually happened for the last 5 years and see if the model predicts where we are. And so people like actuaries and statisticians can do that. And now you have a model that you can use to say, okay, if we hire more people from this college, if we do more of this kind of training, if we change the tenure or the location, what will happen? That's where this is going to go. That's really what Target did. But there are, you know, they're probably 15 years down the curve here. But that's where you're going to end up. And there are companies doing that today in HR. And I think it'll happen a lot faster than you realize. So level 1 is operational reporting. Level 2 is advanced or proactive reporting. Level 3 is what I call strategic analytics. And level 4 is what we call predictive analytics. In all cases, wherever you are on this continuum, you have to maintain your credibility. You'll find in our research that you'll need more help from IT as you move up the ladder. You won't be able to do it completely on your own because you won't have all the data in your LMS. You will want to compare. One of the things we found is as companies move up that continuum, they have to talk to the other analytics groups. Not only do we have to get all the HR analytics groups together, but we want to talk to the other analytics groups. So some of these companies have monthly or quarterly meetings where the marketing analytics team, the supply chain analytics team, and the HR analytics team get together, and they share information on tools and data, and what are you doing, and how's it working, and did you find some great consultants we can use, and so forth. So you become a part of a bigger community in your organization that's looking at data together. Okay, a couple of examples, and then we'll knock it off, and you guys can go have some dinner and answer any questions. Okay, retailer. Retailers are very good at this, maybe not in HR, but they're very good at it from their products. This is a company that the commonly held wisdom was that in order to sell a lot of their particular product, they needed a sales manager in each store to hire a lot of salespeople, and the job profile of that sales manager was sales manager. And sales managers are managers. Okay, they hire salespeople, they hold them accountable, they coach them, they train them, they give them quotas, they manage them. They did a bunch of research on the engagement levels in their stores. And the reason they did that was they were having a threat of a labor relations problem. And their CEO said, we need to figure out where the pockets of low engagement are, go get all this engagement data. In the process of getting the engagement data, the person that got that data also got sales data, and she figured out there seemed to be some relationships here. And they eventually realized, through some analysis, that this job, this sales manager job, was actually a pivotal job. It had a big factor in the sales variation between stores. So they went and they looked at the characteristics of these sales managers, and they found that, in fact, the right sales manager, the one that really drove a lot of sales, wasn't a manager. It was a specialist. It was a product specialist. It was somebody that really knew how this particular company, and I don't want to tell you too much about them because it's one of these stories where they don't really want everybody to know, but they really knew a lot about this particular company's products and how customers use them. So they were really a guru in the buyer behavior and the buyer needs, not a manager. So they changed the hiring profile for that particular job and had a dramatic improvement in sales. That's a very sophisticated analysis, and this is a company that knows how to do this. But that's an example of a commonly held belief that needed to be tested and could be tested with data. I'll jump to the third one. Food service company goes out and manages food facilities for companies, restaurants, ballparks, schools. Their business is one of, they call themselves the, what's the term they use? They stand behind their clients. They don't brag a lot about what they're doing. When you go into their cafeteria, you don't even know that these employees work for this other company. You think they work for the actual company that they're serving. So they have a very service-oriented culture. And somebody in the operations department looked at contract renewal and found there's wide variations in contract renewal amongst customers and said, well, there's got to be something that we can find that will tell us a little bit more about why some companies renew and some companies don't. So he went and did a bunch of analysis, and this was actually apparently a summer intern that did this. So it was somebody came out of college or maybe a grad student, worked on this over the summer, and they found out that the most highly correlated factor that was driving turnover was the safety record, the OSHA safety record of the team that was serving that client. Now, safety was a big topic for this organization. They had a lot of safety training, they had a lot of safety program certification, but it was always treated as a cost reduction program. If we reduce the number of accidents, our insurance will go down, so we want a high level of compliance to a level where we can see our OSHA insurance rates down at a certain level. Oh no, that's not actually what's going on. This has a direct impact on revenue. The safety is correlated to revenue. So all of a sudden, this safety compliance dashboard, which was probably something that came out once a year and once every 6 months, suddenly got escalated into the monthly operations reviews of the salespeople. So they knew on their accounts whether all their teams had been through safety training, whether they were current on safety training, if they had had any safety issues, why they had had them. All of a sudden, this thing bubbled up to the top of the operations review process because they took the time to look at the data and maybe ignore some of the commonly held wisdom. Anyway, lots of interesting stories. I love this stuff. I find it totally fascinating. At 4:15 or 4:30 on a afternoon, it may not be as interesting for all of you as it is for me, but these stories are just amazing. And you have them in your company. I guarantee they're right in front of your face when you get to the point that you can take a little bit of time and work on them. Two more really quick. These are some case studies I did a year or two ago. AMC, all the money that's made in the theater business comes from concessions. None of it is made from the ticket price. The ticket price barely covers the cost of the theater and licensing the movie. So AMC wants to sell you a lot of popcorn and soda and candy. So of course they spent many, many months and years trying to figure out how to optimize that. Do we need bigger signs? Do we need to change where you walk when you walk in? Do we need to make the popcorn bigger? Do we need to put more lights on it? The smell in the store when you walk in? All this stuff they're working on. So they did some statistical analysis. They looked at the popcorn sales, the concession sales across all their stores. They correlated it to job roles and various sophistication of various job roles. And they also correlated with turnover. And they found interestingly enough, that the stores that had poor concession sales also had high turnover, which led them to the conclusion that, well, maybe the people working in those stores aren't really very happy with their jobs, and maybe that has something to do with why people buy popcorn. And after a little bit more analysis, and so the head of HR said, well, we basically have a happiness problem. If people aren't happy, they won't buy popcorn, and if our employees are not happy, then our customers are not happy, and they're in a grumpy mood, so they're not going to spend their $10 on popcorn because they don't feel like it. So we're going to train everybody on how to be happy. So we put together a big training program. They rolled it out for 2 years on how to be, how to treat employees well. And he said, he said it kind of worked a little bit. We saw some improvement, but it really didn't change the problem too much. And he said, and then one day I was in the shower, and I said to myself, it hit me. He said, the problem is we're not hiring happy people. We can't train happy people. We have to hire happy people. Let's look at what criteria we're using for hiring. Same story. So he said, well, we need to change the criteria for hiring. So he went in and he looked at the characteristics of the good, happy managers, the employees that were really, really driving concession sales in their stores, did some IO psychology, and determined that they needed a different profile of hiring, because this is kind of a low-wage job, and you get a lot of people that are just looking for anything, to go work in a theater. Second story is cosmetic sales. According to the Bon-Ton stores, and this may be true in all retailers, cosmetic sales are among the highest margin products in retail. That's why the cosmetic counter is so big. And the commonly held belief by cosmetic manufacturers is that the best cosmetic salespeople are who? The most beautiful women, the best attractive, best looking people that you're going to walk up to the store and say, okay, I really want to look like that person, so I'm going to go up to that person and see what they can do for me. So they did the same kind of analysis. They looked at the high performing stores versus the rest of the stores. They did a psychographic analysis of the store employees that were selling cosmetics and those versus the others. They found there was very little relationship to what they believed was appearance. I don't even know how they assessed appearance. That's another story. But what they found was actually cognitive ability was the driver of cosmetic sales. Is that they needed to hire people that were very smart. And I said, why do you think that was? And he said, because what we realized is that actually cosmetic sales is a very, very complicated sale. Somebody walks up to you, they stand 3 feet in front of your face, they stare right at you and then say, what should I buy? And you have 100 brands to pick from. You have to pick the color, you have to pick the brand, you have to find the right thing for this person. You actually have to be very, very smart, very well trained, and you have to think very fast. And the people that it turned out that had those kinds of characteristics and those kinds of skills were actually doing a very good job of impressing their customers and selling a lot of cosmetics. And they had to go back to the cosmetic manufacturers and take this data and say, guys, we're not hiring the right people, and you need to rethink what you're telling us, because the cosmetic manufacturers, in many cases, are the ones that hire these salespeople. So, anyway, lots of examples. Here's an example of leadership data that was used as well. How do you get there from here? It's going to take time. This is an organization that started in 2007 and evolved And as you can see, year by year, they started to solve different problems as they became more sophisticated. They started with engagement, then they moved into other areas of analysis, building on the credibility they had established each year. They eventually turned into an organization that looked like this. This is a sort of an integrated, evolved HR analytics team. It's not just learning, it's not just recruiting, it's not just engagement. It's a team. It's not 100 people. I think it's a dozen people. But it took them this period of time to get there. Here's another organization that went through exactly the same evolution. This is actually a manufacturing firm. And this is why I sort of hyped earlier this issue that it is an evolution and it will take time. And one of the things that these guys found was that in the early days of their organization, they had to focus very heavily on reporting. And over time, as they became better and they understood where the data was and their skills improved, they found that they could spend more time on analytics. So again, it's just a journey, and you need to just get your organization to buy into the journey. Culture will change. As a result of you, the insurance company told me that when they came up with this data on hiring, they were scared to death to go to the senior executives and show it to them. Because these guys were the ones that had created the culture of hiring top kids from top grades and top universities. But sure enough, through credibility and proof, slowly that organization started to change and it started to make decisions differently. So in all of these cases, what I've heard was that you have to use small wins to change the culture. Not every company thinks like Google. Most companies don't. Most companies don't have, engineers or data scientists, at the CEO level that come from that background. Final point, and then I'll wrap up. Skills. This is last week's Wall Street Journal. The word is out. This is the place to be. This is the career you want to have. Young kids in college are getting the message here. So the availability of these skills is going up. I have a daughter who happens to be very good at math. I'm encouraging her to go into this direction. I'll see where that goes. But I think you will find a lot more analytic skills in the market than you think. They may not be in HR today. They may not be in your department today. David Kuhl told me, I talked to him last week, he told me that he just went out and looked for a sort of a chief statistics person to come into First Data to help them with some of their predictive analytics. He found somebody, and he's moving along on that path. So I don't think you're going to find a shortage of these people. I think you're actually going to find a lot of people that are very excited about it. The people that work for me that have these kinds of backgrounds, they are so excited about doing this kind of work. Your job or your organization's job is just to put together this roadmap so that you can take advantage of the capabilities that you have. So let me stop there. It's an important initiative. You can do it in a predictable fashion. There's some really easy to understand best practices here. You have to be patient. It is not as a technology problem. Technology will help you, but ultimately the problem will be your organization, your time invested, your stakeholders giving you the support you need. And with a little bit of patience, every year we'll come back and there'll be more stories up here talking about predictive analytics. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh.